Okay, so picking up where we left off, we're going to fork off of this. So I'm going to create a fork, and I'm going to change this to Flexbox 06, and we'll say Flex Layout Challenge, creating row links. Okay. All right, so we'll save that. All right, now that way you can always go back if you kind of get to a point of no return and you feel like you've messed something up. You at least have the original of the last stopping point. So, all right, let's take a look at this and let's figure out what we want to do. And if you remember before, I was talking about how if I hover over this, I want this whole thing to be clickable as one unit, but the problem right now is that these are all discretely separate units. Here, let me collapse all of this, all these divs here, and that way you can get a better sense of it just by looking. So we've got these 10 divs, all right, but really we've got 5 rows. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can look at these each of these rows, each of these 5 rows as a single unit in and of themselves, right? So, but we need to make it so that this whole span of two divs is clickable as a single link. So that's kind of a challenge, right? That is actually interesting as a challenge. So what we want to do is be able to essentially make the first div of each row, right? So that would be all of the odd ones. So it would be 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. We'd want to make each one of those divs have a link inside of them. I'm going to open the first one up, and we'll use this as a sort of a test case where we can be able to hover over it, and it expands over the entire space of both of those divs. Okay, now the thing is that you can't have it outside of the divs because of the way that we've written so many of these rules, right? The divs themselves are taking on certain kinds of properties based on the fact that they are direct descendants, or excuse me, direct children of this row class. So we can't just like come over here and stick an A tag in there because it'll mess up the order of everything. So what we want to be able to do is put it inside of this first div, but the problem then, here, let's just go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and inside of this first div, let's create an anchor tag. So we'll say a href equals, and then I'm just going to put like a pound symbol so that you can see that it's just like a blank, you know, it behaves as a link, but it doesn't really do anything. And we'll end that anchor tag. All right, and then we need to put some text in it. So maybe this is what we could do. Maybe we could put, you know, like 0, 1 or something like that. And then whenever you see it, what it does is it shows up here just as a clickable link as a regular old text link, right? Well, what we want to be able to do is make it fill this entire space so that when we put our mouse over it, it becomes actionable as a link, all right? Well, we know that we can do that from other lessons that we've done, where if we were to make this class, not class, I'm sorry, we make this parent div, if we make the parent div relative position and we make the anchor tag absolute position, then we can make it so that it's absolute relative to its relative parent, right? So that we can tell it to go to the top left corner of its parent, and so that would be like this one. If we had one down here, it would go to this top left corner of its parent, and if we, you know, told it to max out a width, you know, it would max out the width, and so on, right? So what we can do then is, by that logic, if we wanted, instead of just saying 0, 1, what we could do is we could take this H2, we can cut that, and make that actually something that is clickable if we want, make it sort of attractive looking. We can paste that inside of the anchor tag, and then it actually becomes a clickable link. Right, now, the issue that we've got, as I mentioned, is that we have to make this thing so that it takes up the whole space. And the first step in that, in doing that, remember that what we mentioned is we're going to go and we need to tell all of the parent elements, which would be all of these divs, and the way that we decided that we were going to write that rule in case we ever decided that the div is going to be called something different. You know, it could be an article, it could be a whatever, right? Then what we're going to end up doing here is identifying where we've got all of the direct children of section, because that's what these divs are being targeted as, is direct children of section, right? And then we are going to go over and we're going to say position relative, right? All right, and that is required. Either the parent has to be a relative, absolute, or fixed position in order for a child of it to be able to essentially anchor right up into the, you know, top left corner of that, and instead of the top left corner of the entire viewport, right? So the most logical one then would be relative, because we don't want the parent to be absolute or fixed, because then it would be bizarre and it would break our entire flexbox. So we're going to make that, we're going to make all those divs relative by targeting all of the direct children of section. Okay, and then the next thing that we need to do is we need to come down and make a rule. Let's just come below all of the section rules, and we're going to make something that is for the anchor tag. And the other thing too that I can do, by the way, is if we had other anchor links in here, we wouldn't want them to be oh, what's the word I'm looking for? We wouldn't want them to have a conflict with these anchor tags. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a special class on these, and I'm going to say class equals, and I'll just call it fill, okay? Because we want it to fill the entire space. So we're going to make all of the anchors that we do like this, we're going to give them a class of fill. All right, and then if I come down here and I make a new rule that's called a.fill, because fill is actually assigned to A. All right, so what I can do is say position, and we will say absolute, like this. All right, and then you see automatically it got pulled out of the document flow. That's why all that other text just moved up, because it was no longer interacting with it, and that's okay. So we're going to say position absolute, and then we'll say top is 0, left is 0, and we want to make sure to give it a z index, and this is super important. Sometimes you can get away with not giving something a z index, but in this particular case you have to, and the reason is because we made all of the divs relative, and so you'll see later that this, maybe I'll show you later, that this would actually dive underneath this one if we didn't give it a z-index. So let's just give it a low z-index. Any z-index that we give it, like let's say 100, is going to be higher than 0, right? Even if we gave it a z-index of 1. But this way, if we want to put something under 100, we can. So, and we definitely can put stuff over 100. So we'll give it a z-index of 100. The other thing I want to do is I want to give it, let's go ahead and give it a background color so that we can see the space that it's occupying. So we'll say background, and let's do an RGBA value so that we can say like 0, 0, 0, and let's do like 0.3 or something, so that it's not too dark, but it's dark enough that we can actually see the space that's taking up. Let's do 0.2 in fact. Okay, and so we obviously want it to span more space than that. So let's go height, let's say 100%, and it'll take up 100% of its parent, right? Or of its available space, I should say, right, of its relative parent, and so that's working. Now let's do something where we say width, and if we say 100%, right, it's going to fill up this space, right? That's fine, but we want to notice that whenever I hover over this, I get the little link hand, but if I hover over the picture file, I just get a regular pointer cursor, right? I want it to span the entire space, so you might go, okay, well, let's do 200%, right? And then boom, now, because you've doubled the amount of space and because it's absolute, it can go out over on top, which is pretty cool, right? Now, that's all good and well. And let's actually do something where let's do a hover state for a fill. Let's copy that and we'll paste a fill, do a hover like this. Oops. Let's try that again. A fill hover. And let's do it so that the RGBA part of it, let's just copy that. And let's just make it so that it goes to 0 so that it's completely transparent, so that on hover it gets brighter. Okay, so all right, and so far we don't have it on the other ones because we've only got this anchor in one place, right? And because the text align for everything on the parent element, if you look up here, we've got text align of center, then it's automatically sticking it in the dead center of this, which is okay. All right, for right now, that's okay. You might decide later that you want it up here. We can figure out how to push that around. But right now, what's nice is that I've got this whole space acting as a unit, right? So if we want to look at doing everything like that, then let's go ahead and I'm just going to copy this anchor tag. I'm going to copy it, and we need to put it in the other ones that would have that as well. So let's come down here, and instead of having that H2 like that, we'll just write over it and we'll paste so that we've got the anchor tag around it, and it also says 0, 1. So let's change that, and instead of saying 03, let's say 02, so that now we know that we're talking about the rows. Okay, and then we'll do the next one. It's just going to be here, and we'll say, oops, let's try this again. Paste, and we'll do this as 05, and we'll do 07. Paste that. And lastly, we'll do 09. And okay. So far, so good. All right. So now we've got all these different things so that the entire space becomes like a hoverable unit row. Okay. All right. So the next thing that I want to go ahead and look at is this text, this lorem ipsum. It's all sort of jammed up to the top. If I wanted this to be sort of right here in the center, then something else that I can do, let's go where I've got all of these direct children of section, okay? And I want to do something here. We'll put a little comment here so that we know what this is doing. So we'll say next lines center content. Okay, so and actually it centers it vertically and horizontally. I'll just put hors. All right, I'll say vert and hors. Right, so it's nice and or you can even say on X and Y, on X and Y. Okay. All right. So first of all, if we make all of these divs display as flex, we'll say display as flex. And remember, here's the thing. And you see what's happening right now is that it's stretching this out. That's okay. We'll say justify content, and then we'll say center this, and then we'll say align items, and we'll say center. All right. Okay. And so now whenever I scale it, it scales still. It's not doing something weird. Okay. It's still behaving properly the way I intended for it to. All right. Now the other thing too that you'll notice is, and you'll notice that the text is dead center, right, of that content. I also want to go ahead and tell this to be text align left instead of center. So where it says text align, let's do left. Okay. And then it does text align left on everything. You might like center, but generally speaking, it's not a good idea if you have more than about 3 lines of text because it gets too hard to read. And so I would suggest that you do a text align of left. But you might have liked this anchor. You might have liked that in the center. So you know, you can always do something a little bit differently, because if you'll notice, there's some different ways you can approach that. If you'll notice, the way that this is set up is right now I'm saying do a text align of left on everything that happens to be in that div, right? Pretty much what I'm saying is, remember, it's the direct child of section, so the div happens to be the direct child of section. So anything inside of it is going to have a text alignment of center. But if I decided that I wanted, like, just the H2, for instance, to have a text alignment of center instead of left, right, then I can do something that's a little bit more specific. And let's just, I'm not going to do it right there. I'll do it down here under the A fill. So I'll say A dot fill H2. So it'll be the H2 that's inside of the A fill. And I'll say text align. And we can say center for that. Okay, and it still goes and puts it right back in the center. So if we like having that link right there visibly so that it's up there, then we can do that. The other thing too that I want to point out now is that we still have this blue underline. I want to get rid of that. So under A fill, let's go here and we'll say text decoration. Let me get rid of that text decoration. And we will say none. Okay, so then it gets rid of the underline. And then I can also tell it to have a color. So we'll say color. And we can do, let's do an RGBA, and let's do something kind of interesting. All right, let's say we're going to make this white. All right, so 255, 255, 255. And then let's do, like, if I do 1, then that's 100% and it goes white. All right, that's one option. So I can make that large like that. I mean, not large, bright like that. The other thing that I could do too is if I want to change the size, I can't really do that here because if you'll notice, I'll say oops, font size like this. Let's say, just to be really dramatic, let's just say we're going to change it to 2M. Actually, it does work. All right, so I was thinking that maybe the original H2 would override it, but because of its default styling, but it'll work here. So we'll go ahead and we'll leave the font size on the actual A. So I could make it in terms of like the size being in M's, but the problem is that it doesn't scale with the rest of the page. So I think it could be kind of cool if we did it in viewport width. So if we say that the font size is, let's do like 20 VH. Or VW for viewport width, right? That's really, really big. And it also, because of being really high up on the Z index, it's on top of the text. So one of the things that you could do too that's kind of interesting is you can also do this RGBA, and instead you could make it like, let's say 0.3, so that it's kind of dimmed out, which is kind of interesting. Maybe 0.5. It might make some of the text harder to read depending on what you end up doing with it. Let's maybe say 0.4. But it's actually kind of cool. I think it's kind of interesting. So we could mess around with that. The other thing is if I wanted it to be vertically centered, then I need to do something else. I need to actually tell this anchor, let's say that we want it to be a display type of flex, right? And remember, as I said before, with flex, you can nest flexible items inside of other flexible items, right? So, and that's just fine. So we're going to tell this to be display flex. And then very similarly to what we had done up here, let's see, with these, let's say, in fact, I can just copy this where next line center content on X and Y. I can come down here and I'll just paste this here. And you'll see that it then centers everything right in the middle, which is kind of cool too, right? So we could make it so that it centers it like that if you wanted. Where it says justify content, you could also do like, you could say flex start, all right, like this. and then it can be underneath just the text if you wanted it to be, right? And that's kind of interesting. And then in that case, it actually gets a little bit harder to read the text. You might need to knock it down a little bit. So you could knock it down some so that it becomes easier to read. But you know, it's also pretty interesting in the center too. You could also try flex end, for instance, right? And that doesn't actually change anything. So let's undo that, and we'll just take this back to center. Okay. You could even play around like with a text shadow if you wanted. So we'll say text shadow. At this point, I'm just totally messing around. I'm just playing. We'll do 0 so that it's at a 90-degree angle, so that the shadow is just directly underneath it. It's not askew off to the left or right too much. And then we can do this other one. Let's say maybe 3 pixels or something, and maybe 10 pixels for the blur. Let's say maybe 5 for the spread. And RGBA, maybe this can be, let's just see what happens if we make it black. All right, so based off of the black color set, like maybe like 0.9. Yeah, I don't know. I think that I choked it down too much on the spread, so let's see what happens at 15. Yeah, that doesn't seem to be working out too much. In fact, if I just get rid of this value, see if, oh, and it does that, right? So it's actually, it doesn't choke it down enough, right? So if I, because it's directly behind it, so maybe let's see what happens at 0.2, and then you start to get a little bit more of this three-dimensional quality of it, right? And let's also see what happens if we do it as a glow. Like let's say 255, 255, 255, so that it ends up being a white glow. It's kind of intense. Here, let's undo that. Yeah, so anyway, you've kind of got this thing going on. Like if we wanted to make the color a little bit brighter like that, and we can drop the drop shadow down just a little bit, so that it does have some dimensionality, right? But you can still read the other text that comes through, right? This is kind of interesting, right? You've got some different choices here, but you can see that that there are a lot of different ways that you can play around with that, and that's dead center. And it's kind of interesting at some scales for it to be in the center, but I don't know that I actually like it in the center sort of permanently. So I think that that might be where I would come back over here, and I might say for justify content, let's say flex start, for instance, right? And then I might want to also give it some padding as well, so that it's not sitting over here on the edge, so that, you know, I'd want it to be a little bit bumped over. So in that case, let's go ahead and do this. Let's see what padding 1M looks like. And that's putting it all the way around as well. So maybe see what 0.5 does. Yeah, maybe 0.25. All right, and that might be a little bit better if we're trying to get it sort of more centered, and and then it still looks okay whenever it's larger. Okay, and that would presume that you know, it's not like a long piece of text. It would need to, you would need to presume that it would be, you know, just like the numbers. If it were something longer, you might need to change the scale of it, and so on and so on. I can also get rid of this text shadow. I don't know if I actually like that. And we can drop this back down to like 0.3 or 0.2 even, right? And so you've got this kind of this layer of, you know, that's a little bit interesting. Let's just take this back down to like 0.1M actually. I think that might be a little bit better. All right, and anyway, so there you go in terms of how you can have it overlay like that.